Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm sure we're watching from everywhere around the world. I think we have about 300 people online now. Our panelists are from, speaking from the UK, from the US, from Sweden, from Chad, from Nairobi as well. So it's quite a global audience. Without wasting time, I think to discuss this very exciting topic for today, food without farmers. This is the future we want. We've got really very good panelists to talk about this with you today. I'll just run through quickly just to introduce the panelists to you very quickly, and then we'll get into the substance. First, we have George Monbiot, who's an author. He's a columnist with The Guardian and also an environmental campaigner. He's very well known. I know quite a lot of his work as well. George really is a really good person. He's worked a lot on natural climate solutions, and he even co-presented with Greta on some of his TED Talks. And his TED Talks actually attract 40 million views at a time, 50 million views. So that's quite... So we really hope to get some good value from him today. Our second speaker will be Gunnar, Mr. Gunnar Rundgren. Gunnar has worked most parts of organic farm sector globally, working from farm to policy over 50 years now. He's been a consultant for the United Nations, for the World Bank, and for various big development organizations. He became a board member of IFOAM in 1998 and has since then, worked a lot on this subject. He's honorary, doctorate in quite a number of institutions. So he's going to talk to us today quite detailedly about this from an organic farming sector perspective. Our third speaker would be Mrs. Hindu Umaru Ibrahim from Chad. Hindu is very well known in the climate sector. She's an environmental activist and from Chad, and she works basically with pastoral communities looking at indigenous rights and environmental protection, mainly in Chad, but across Africa. She founded and is leading the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad, AFPAT, and has been engaged in global campaigning for indigenous communities and was recognized recently with the Pritzker Emerging Environmental Genius Award. So we've got, as our fourth speaker, Dr. Walter Willett. Walter is a professor of epidemiology and nutrition at Harvard University, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and has been a professor at the Harvard Medical School for quite a number of years. He's even been dean of chair of the Department of Nutrition for more than 25 years. He's very well published. And just to let you know, he's also among the top 3 most cited persons in all areas of science. That's quite phenomenal, with about 1,900 peer-reviewed articles. And he's also a member of the National Academy of Science in the US. Our last speaker would be Mrs. Julia Leonard. She's worked as a data information manager of the Research Institute for Organic Agriculture up until 2019. And Julia is quite well known for leading quite some important work in the organic agriculture sector. She's led the annual report, the World of Organic Agriculture, that has been published quite well and well known. And she's also led and produced the State of Sustainable Markets report in partnership with the International Trade Center and the States of Sustainable Initiatives. She grows, her own family farm and worked for 6 years at the family company. She's also been a board member of IFOAM since 2017. So we've got a really, really great panel today. And I'm really grateful that they took the time and they're present here to talk to us. So we'll go through our panelists. Each one of them would have about 4 minutes to talk a little bit about this topic. And we'll start with George. So George, with your tremendous experience and your passion for this whole subject of growing, food in the lab, I'd like to know from you, what is lab-grown food? And the audience might want to look at how does such a vision contribute to low-carbon economy and help us stay within planetary boundaries, and who owns the technology at the moment?
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you everyone for listening. I've become interested in this subject of lab-grown food for two reasons. One, because of the tremendous damage done to the world's living systems by principally the livestock industry with its massive use of land, very often land which could otherwise be harboring tremendous ecosystems and fantastic wildlife and defending indigenous people. And secondly, because an increasing number of scientific papers now are suggesting that somewhere between 2 and 3.5 degrees of global heating, basically we lose the ability to feed ourselves. Farming collapses in several parts of the world. We could be faced with global systemic harvest failure, a synchronous harvest failure in several of the world's major breadbasket regions, some of which could start shifting towards dust bowls. And we are in very, very serious trouble indeed, unimaginably serious trouble if that happens. I mean, we've been seeing people recently fighting over toilet paper in the supermarkets. I hope we never have to see people fighting over food, but unless there's a really dramatic shift and we see fossil fuels left in the ground, then that's a very real prospect. And very few people are really getting to grips with that. So rather reluctantly, for those two reasons, I've begun to take an interest in lab-grown food, particularly in microbial protein, where protein can be produced very quickly and efficiently from soil bacteria with minimal inputs. And that protein can then be used potentially as building blocks for all sorts of other foods. It could be a feedstock for cultured meat and milk, for example, for cultured fish, taking massive pressure potentially off fisheries. It could be an ingredient in all sorts of other foods. I see it both as a way of potentially replacing some of the meat products which we use with such devastating effect at the moment, ecological effect, and as an insurance policy to develop in case we do fail to get a grip with climate breakdown and we do face structural global famine if we rely entirely on farmed products under those circumstances. There are big problems with it, and I think the biggest problem is intellectual property, which could potentially allow a few corporations to really corner the market in what might turn out to be an absolutely crucial foodstuff. And we should all be getting in at the beginning now, working very hard to ensure that doesn't happen, and to ensure that if these things are developed, which I believe they should be, it should be done on the basis of open source platforms, open source material, open source techniques and technologies. Because what we do not want to see is this becoming a new frontier for corporate concentration and control of the food chain.
Okay, thanks a lot for your very, very brief and insightful talk. I really enjoyed it. I think there was quite some salient points in there for us to take forward in the discussion that comes after this. Gunnar, I'm sure you're ready to talk to us. Is there a way in which farmers can adjust and adapt to climate change, or will they really face this future? How are global markets shaping demands and farming? And how do you have any ways in which we can try and reduce this impact for them?
Well, let me start with the later part of it. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, by the way. I think I start with the market perspective because overall, by and large, the markets are very important in today's world. In fact, I think we already know how to farm sustainably, and I think we know how to eat healthy. The problem is, in my perspective, is not really lack of technology or even lack of information. I think we perfectly know what to do, but it's simply not profitable. It's simply not doable within the economic framework we have constructed. If you look at the problems, the ills of the food system, animal factory farming, endless monocultures, all the chemicals used, the dramatic loss of biodiversity, obesity, malnutrition, food waste, bad working conditions, and threatened livelihoods for small farmers and pastoralists, I think they all come together by being driven by the same force, the global market economy or capitalism, call it what you like. I mean, take it, for example, food waste. I mean, we are morally condemning consumers because they waste food, but why are they wasting food? Why do they buy more than they need? The market economy has basically transformed food into a commodity, into a product whose main purpose is to be bought and sold. And the role of the consumer in this system is basically to buy. They buy too much food, they eat too much food, they eat the wrong kind of food, food with cheap calories, which are produced by giant corporations. And in the end, they throw away a big share of the food they buy, which is totally coherent with the logic of the market. It's the same with clothes or anything else. We are over-consuming because the market wants us to buy more and more. And if you go on the farmer's side, the problems with industrial farming are all triggered, I would say, by the market economy. Animals and plants are just commodities to be sold in competition with millions of other producers doing exactly the same thing. The economies of scale drive farmers into linear industrial production systems, building on buying mostly inputs instead of relying on the local ecosystems. And specialization and mechanization go hand in hand with this. And the end result is what we have, so to say. And I think we need to challenge that system rather than to look into technological fixes. Of course, there will always be technological development, and we also within the organic and sustainable agriculture, we can improve, we can do research, but basically I think we already know how to farm and eat sustainably. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Gunnar. I think that a very interesting discussions, and I see there's a thread almost emerging already from the first two talks, but we'll leave that for the questioning session. Let's go to Hindu. Hindu, good to have you here as well. How can we protect food sovereignty for indigenous people and other vulnerable groups under such scenarios in the long run? Is there a way to combine traditional knowledge with technological advancement? Some of the things Gunnar talked about, can we bring that into the indigenous setting?
Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope that in this moment, all of you and your families doing well. And it's so hard, and we are seeing how food is very important, particularly in this time. And food sovereignty become a big challenge actually now, because when they close all the border, they lock down everyone, but they let the food shipping to be open. And this is around all the continent and all the countries. They took this decision in the natural way. So that's make our discussion very valuable, because what is the food sovereignty of each state, each nation, but each community? So that's what indigenous peoples do, because when we talk about food sovereignty, we always talk about us, about how we produce in our community, but how we respect the food that we eat, and how culturally it's representing us. That can come from the farmers, from pastoralists, from the fishermen, and from the hunter-gatherers that depend from the food and the brood. So in indigenous people's way, we always have the land who is the most important for us. So that's why we we are just like laughing where the international community is started by organic food, calling the organic food. We say like we already eating organic and we already growing organic because we use our traditional knowledge to make the balance in our soil, to fertilize it in the natural way. And one of the example I can share with you as a cattle herder coming from Mbororo pastoralist. So why we continuously doing our nomadic way of life, because when we move one place to another one, our cow should become a natural fertilizer to the land. So it can help growing the pastures. It can help also the farmers now with the climate change impact to come and sit in this land to grow up them food. So when you use like the chemical and when you use the natural fertilizer, you know exactly it is different, because we are seeing that the people that using chemicals, they change the farm maximum in 5 years. And that's exactly what's happening in all over part of Africa. And us coming from the Sahel, I know how the food security impacting the peoples, but I know also how indigenous peoples are doing the best to know when they have to plant them seeds. And that's linking directly to our knowledge. So we do have a traditional knowledge based on astrology. So there are a number of the stars that can be positions who can announce the coming rain season. And when those stars are not well fixed with our atmosphere and the moon positions, even there is a first and second rain, you can't plant your crop. You have to wait. And sometimes even there is no rain, but this position is just to link it in a right way, you can plant your crops, and that help you to get the food that you want for your community. But of course, climate change impacting a lot what is happening. It's changing a lot our way of production and of consumptions. But the most important is how we can use the knowledge of indigenous people who are very valuable with the technology that exists. And then I leave you with the second example that we do. So we do work with meteorological organization in indigenous communities. So we try to combine the two knowledge to give the better information on the weather forecast for indigenous communities. And that help not just for like 1 month, but it can give the information for 3 to 12 months to the farmers to say, okay, now you can harvest, now you can plant. So if we all come back to the food sovereignty of indigenous peoples, to the knowledge that we do have in our hand, we can produce better food and we can eat better food. And I think someone said very well, food waste, it's one thing, but we do not see the food waste in developing countries. Why? Because we do respect the food. When we start eating, we know that the food we have to give first to the children's, and then to old peoples, and then the rest of the family can come and eat. When there is rest, we use this rest to eat it again. If we do not, we cannot eat it. So there are our cows who can eat them. There are the sheep who can eat them. There are the chicken who can eat them. We never throw the food in the garbage because just we do have enough or we don't want to eat it. So if we do not respect the food culturally, spiritually, we cannot have the enough food for ourselves. And that needs to be a big transformation and transition from the lack of the food to the food sufficiency, to the food sovereignty, and to the rest.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Hindu. Very interesting insights there. And we'll come back to those with the questioning. Thanks a lot. Thanks. Let's go to Walter. Walter, thanks for being here, and I'm sure we will benefit from your talk at the moment. Well, I think what the audience might like to hear from you would be, how do you see a healthy and sustainable diet in 20 years' time? How do you see lab-grown food coming in, and how does farm-free, food production benefit the world, the public, or do you see it like just a situation where multinationals will completely benefit? What is your take on that?
Sure. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank everyone for getting us together. This is really an amazing group of people with incredible experience and perspectives and we need all of that because the future is so challenging. I think looking ahead 20 years, actually that's coming pretty quickly, I don't think the basic picture of a healthy and sustainable diet is going to change radically during that time for most people. And from lots of research, we understand that for it to be optimally healthy, it should be primarily plant-based, not entirely necessarily, but emphasizing vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and with optional and modest amounts of dairy, fish, poultry, and other meats. The best studied example by far is the traditional Mediterranean diet, but we know we can put those kind of pieces together using the dietary traditions of pretty much the whole world, whether it be Africa, Asia, Latin America, or elsewhere. And I think we do really need to put those pieces together like has been done in the Mediterranean diet tradition in a way that is enjoyable, aspirational, and regarded as smart because it is both healthy and environmentally sustainable and affordable. So a lot of shifting our eating patterns has to be dealt with on the demand side. And unfortunately, as Gunnar mentioned, there are economic reasons that have been a lot of the drivers to create this situation of terrible diets that we have now. It probably, maybe not necessarily the worst, but in the US now, obesity is up to 42%. And with the COVID epidemic, the main reason that people are getting seriously sick and dying is because they either have diabetes, obesity, hypertension, heart disease, which are really primarily conditions that are diet driven. So that we know that people are dying early because of those conditions. We've known that for a long time, but now it's just happening in a dramatic way before our eyes. I do think we'll see much more variety in production systems, including lab-grown meat and perhaps greenhouses in desert situations where various types of protein foods are produced in amazing ways that they can be now, even where you need very little water and just capturing the tremendous amount of solar energy that's coming down in those situations. And I would strongly encourage research and development and creating as many options as we can because we don't totally understand the future. And I agree with George, we need all the options we can on the table. And we don't really know what the optimal set of experiences options will be given conditions that are changing very rapidly before us. But I also agree with Hindu that we should first look to traditional knowledge and practices that have accumulated and been refined over thousands of years. And for healthy dietary pattern for a culture, first look at the traditional culture and foods that are produced and consumed as a starting point. It's not always, from what we understand now, optimal. I could say that about the Northern European diet. It was a diet that people could subsist on in Northern Europe in harsh conditions, but not the healthiest diet. It was really a heavily animal-based diet that we see clearly isn't the most healthy diet. There are some real advantages I can see from farm-free production of meat. Now, I don't think we need meat in high amounts, but if people want to have modest amounts, that can be produced without antibiotics, less disease transmission, potentially more efficient than the kind of industrial production of meat that we have now, because that's just so inefficient, feeding grain to cattle and such tremendous inefficiency in that system and a huge amount of greenhouse gas produced in the process. There's, I think, a growing place for urban gardening, and especially for highly perishable foods like greens. But we're not going to produce large amounts of grains and many other crops in urban areas. I already mentioned possibly desert farming, where we can minimize the water that's needed and use maybe algal systems. More efficient greenhouses in colder climates can clearly play a role. So I think there is virtually everything we're producing, we can do better. And we need research on how to do that better, how to optimize every kind of production system. But I quite agree that the way we're doing things now is to a large extent driven by economic conditions. And the reason we have these vast monocultures in the whole Midwest, our family farm in Michigan, is basically vast monoculture corn. And that's what a farmer can survive doing now, given the economic opportunities and pricing system. So we do really have to look carefully at the mix of loans, subsidies, taxes. As some people said earlier, what we're doing now does not really internalize the cost in terms of greenhouse gas production, pollution, when we go to buy something that looks very cheap in the store.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Walter. You want to wrap up, or you done?
That's it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Walter. Really good points. We'll come back to those, I'm sure, and I'm sure people are asking questions. Please remember to type your questions on Slido as we go. So when we come back from Julia's intervention, then we can take some questions. So Julia, thanks for your patience. Thank you for waiting. Now we would just like to hear from you. How might we equip farmers with the right skills and the right knowledge needed to farm sustainably? Previous speakers have spoken a bit about that. How do you see that? See us doing that and make sure that people are integrating the local traditions, and what role for agroecological approaches such as organic? How does that play in?
Well, first I would like to rethink the question. I think we keep on saying we need to train farmers. We need to, we treat them like childs that need knowledge, and they have vast knowledge. As Hindu said, as Gunnar said, knowledge is there. So we actually maybe should try to empower them. We should actually try to connect them, to exchange, to bring the knowledge they have of their landscape, of their environment, of what grows there, how the climate behaves there, and actually try to diversify the systems we have. We have an homogenization of systems right now. We are trying to apply one diet, one system all across the world, and I think that's one of the main reasons that brought us to the crisis we have right now, that we are eating 5 products all around the world that brings also obesity, that is not really giving the nutrients we need. Today I was in the early sessions, and as Hindu said, now with this pandemic, we see all the roles, the key players, what we need. And for example, here in Argentina, every day at 9, the whole country in the evening goes out to their balconies and claps doctors, policemen, etc., that help to run the country in the lockdown. But we forget to clap the farmers. The farmers are bringing our food. It's not only coming from a shelf, it's not coming really from a dispenser. There's farmers with knowledge, with work, and we should remember to clap for them as well. So for me, I can't conceive a future without farmers. I conceive rather a future where we are all farmers, where urban farming comes more into play, where farmers are more empowered and recognized and not are seen as a shameful thing to do, where young people go more into farmers, where aboriginals' knowledge is taken into account and really recognized as actual knowledge and technologies and ways to perceive and really understand the landscapes. Of course, as Gunnar said, technology, the world moves. We should adopt certain technologies. We need to improve certain methodologies because we learn. With time, we learn, and we learn that maybe something we have been doing was not perfect. And there we need to support farmers, definitely, because we have researchers focusing on certain issues and they develop knowledge, and we need that connection. But that's why I would rephrase the question rather than how we give them tools, how we support them, how actually we work all together in supporting each other and really engaging each other and recognizing the knowledge they already have and start to listen a bit more to them rather than to the big corporations that are running the agro-industrial system we have right now.
Oh, great, great, Julia. I like that. I am very, 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 very happy with the rephrasing of the question. I think that's absolutely the right perspective. I think we will now, thank you so much, all of the panelists, for very brief but also exciting interventions. Let's see what people are saying. Let's hear what people are asking us at the moment. Niam, any specific questions?
Hi, Peter. I would say that we take it from the top. We have a question there from the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask any of the panelists who feel in a position to respond to please do so. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to say something.
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. From Pim van der Horst.
Yeah, well, I looked quite a lot on the lab foods and indoor farming, and as a matter of fact, there is a very delicate connection between energy, land, and water, which people often lose. They're all interrelated, and in indoor farming, for instance, you actually replace land and water with energy. But you don't save land and you don't save energy. You just use energy, land and water, which is somewhere else. As a matter of fact, the energy requirement for indoor farming is just horrendous. 1.5 square meters of indoor farming with the artificial light would, per capita in the world, will consume all the electricity we produce in the world currently. It's just utopian and with no sense of meaning to promote that as something relevant in a food supply connection. It can be fun, it can be nice for a shop to have an indoor farm, like they have an indoor bakery or something like that, but it's just a techno gimmick. And I would say that the other lab foods I've looked into are in a similar way. They are wasting enormous quantities of energy, and then they say they save land. But they don't save land because energy need a lot of land, whether it's for solar panels, wind parks, or mines for nuclear power, not to speak about hydro dams where I live. The area of hydro dams are double the arable land in my country. Only the area of the hydro dams. So we are.
Gunnar, maybe you
using,
wrap up the response so we can give a chance for the other questions.
Yes. So I see these high-tech solutions are not very meaningful, but would like to link in with Hindu and Julia that we really need to re-embed food in the local context and local conditions and local ecosystems, and thereby we create also meaning with the food. Instead of having it just as something you buy or sell, you re-embed it and give it meaning back to food, because we need meaning also, not only nutrients from food.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks a lot, Gunnar. I'll go to George. There was a question, an anonymous question. The second one was about, it says a lab-grown food is controlled by global corporations using often GM resources and bacteria. Why should we embrace that kind of industrial food? If George can provide a response to that, and then I'll ask maybe Julia to think a little bit about why is the use of GMO banned from organic agriculture, and to take that question soon after that. And then maybe if we can come back to the set of questions again. George, can you react briefly to that question?
Thank you very much, Peter. Yes, well, there's all sorts of problems involved in it. And by far the biggest problem is this problem of corporate control and intellectual property. And that, I mean, my feeling is, we don't throw out the technology because of the way it's currently controlled. We have to push for open source technology and take it out of the hands of the corporations. Now, I'd say that what Gunnar said was absolutely correct when it comes to vertical farming of horticulture, for example, but I think he's mixing that up with microbial protein production, which is an entirely different matter, and whose energy and water use can be far, far smaller than those of conventional agriculture producing comparable products. He's absolutely right that if you're trying to use vertical farming to produce vegetables, you're going to use a lot of lighting, you're going to use a lot of heating, there's going to be an awful lot of embodied energy there. but it can be a very different matter indeed when it comes to microbial protein production. These are different technologies. We should assess them differently, and we should not mix up the technology with its misuse, its potential misuse by corporations. If this is a useful technology for humanity, we should make it work for humanity. And that means we should pursue open source, people-owned technologies rather than corporate-owned technologies.
Okay, thanks a lot, George. Thanks. Julia, can you take that? And then maybe Walter, you can, if you have some thoughts relating to that, and also the other question linking global systems to local systems, that would be helpful. So after Julia, then you can come through. Julia, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. And actually, I wanted to build on George. I think the basis of GMO, of genetically modified organisms, is that humans, we jump on new technologies and we get so excited, and then we spread it all around the world without really knowing long-term effects. We don't know how that means to the soils, what it means to our health, to biodiversity, etc. In organic, it's clearly we don't accept GMOs. GMOs, well, they have currently the most used. That, for example, in Argentina, we are one of the biggest GMO consumer countries with soy, BT soy, that has already pesticide inside the sea. So that's a no-go for us. But we also are seeing that it's not delivering on what it promised. The soils are getting more erosion, the productivity gets lower, so you need more input. It's not actually feeding people, it's feeding maybe livestock or going to biofuel. So when we think about technologies, I think we should embrace technologies, but we need to think on the long-term effect. We need to try them, we need to test them, not to be so enthusiastic and go and spread it all around, because they have impacts. And we are seeing it with GMOs, they haven't delivered. We still have hunger, and it's not a matter of production, it's a matter of distribution. It's a matter of priorities. So it's not that we are against technology, we are against modifying genetically the organisms. We're doing it by breeding, that is a completely different technique than in a lab. And also, well, we have the issue of ownership and patents and the fights of seed sovereignty, that farmers can save their own seeds. Well, there are bigger issues why in organic we don't accept it.
Okay, great, thanks. Walter, any thoughts about those two questions?
Just an absolute sharp set of rules. And that I think, like Julia said, we shouldn't totally take GMOs off the table if there are some very careful, thoughtful, smart ways to, say, have some crops that might be more drought resistant in a situation where conventional crops are failing. George is right, they have to be more open access. Unfortunately, the GMO technology has been more used for profit rather than for helping people have sustainable, healthy diets up to this point in time. But it doesn't mean that they can't be useful, very carefully thought out in some situations. And it is important to keep in mind that it's just a technology and a way of moving faster compared to conventional breeding, where we've changed the nature of crops, sometimes by conventional means, sometimes in bad ways as well, where we just bred for yield rather than nutrition.
Thanks. Valid points there. Hindu, can you just talk a little bit, because in your presentation you talked about where people were using chemicals and more modern ways of farming, and then they have to sort of change and move to another place because the soil is destroyed, and so how do you see that integration between the global and the local food systems?
Yeah, I think, as Julia said, it is a matter of priorities. So if you do your own priority, you can develop your economy in a different way. So it's not just like to choose a big farm is better and then you can put chemicals and you can fertilize the land forever. That cannot work like that. It is how they can respect and recognize the smallholder farmers. Because those smallholder farmers are the ones who are feeding the world for a century with a diversity of the food. And we know from the example of indigenous peoples in Peru, from the different kind of corn that they have, more than 800 corn that they do have. It is the same in each indigenous communities. And now just when we move to the chemical, we try to select the seed and we say this seed is much resistant and it's become a globalization for all. At the end of the day, with all the climate impact, the biodiversity loss, the soil change, we cannot get this in a right way. So we need just to reconvert and respect the stockholder farmers, to encourage the young generations. When you value the farmers and you value the food system, so the young generation cannot move from what they do, they can go back and do the farms in a very right way. And when you do not grab the land from the smallholder farmers to do a big farms by using a lot of energy and a lot of water that you cannot control, so you cannot work it well. So that is the most important part that we have to do to preserve the soil and have a sustainable agriculture.
Thank you. Thank you. Really, really great thoughts there. Niam, can we go back to Slido, please? So we can see if there are some more interesting questions that we can take. How can we make sure that lab-grown food is sufficiently nutritious? Always doubt whether we plant what they need to become nutritious. So there is so much still to discover about this. I think maybe how is organic farming facing serious worker shortage? I think we can take the question on making lab-grown food sufficiently nutritious and whether we know enough about that, and how can we call a factory factory vertical farm hydroponics still a farm, you know. I think those two relating to technologies more, and then one said more about worker shortages and things like that. So I don't know if anyone wants to respond to some of those.
Peter, I could pick up the
yes, please, George. Yeah, George. Yeah.
So the answer is that actually we don't know much about nutrition issues at the moment, not as much as we ought to know. There's still a lot of work needs to be done. We need to find out why it is that processed foods are often so harmful to human health, and whether we can avoid those harms if we are to produce lab-grown foods, which of course will require a degree of processing, and indeed are themselves the products of processing. There's still a lot of questions here. I think you know, I want to bring it back really to the original point I was making, that you know, one of the main reasons for looking into this is I think we urgently need an insurance policy. And it might not be a perfect insurance policy, and it might not be a perfect substitute for what we've got, but I feel there's a danger that this discussion is sort of drifting into a state saying, well, this is the ideal we want, this is how we want it, and we can move things in this direction. You say, well, if we get 2 or 3 degrees of global heating, which we're highly likely to get unless we see a very major change, those dreams just go. They just burst like a bubble, because huge areas of the world become unfarmable by whatever means. You know, and you can come up with fantastic ideas for farming, but they're not going to work if it's too hot to be outside, if the thermal tolerances of the plants are exceeded, if the livestock die as a result of heat stress. There's a whole load of reasons why it just becomes impossible to farm beyond a certain degree of heat. And so we desperately need to be putting big resources into investigating questions like this. You know, what is the nutritional implication of lab-grown food? Can we do it without it falling into corporate hands? Can we do it safely? What are the energy implications, etc.? We need to, you know, we must never close our minds to these questions. They are absolutely crucial. They could be crucial for human survival. And please, let's be as open as we can, and let's see some serious research money going into these crucial questions.
Walter, how much do you think is going into understanding all of these issues at the moment?
Well, I quite agree with George that not much is going into understanding all of these issues. And we really should be investing broadly in agriculture, including some of these sort of more novel directions as well. And people have pointed out that in some places insects might be a way to much more efficiently produce food than, certainly vastly more efficient than feeding grain to cattle. So I think we do need to look carefully at the nutritional aspects, and that's both, we can do nutritional analyses pretty quickly and simply and get some rough first approximations about the nutritional value, but we also need long-term studies as well, because we don't totally understand all of the implications for cancer and heart disease just by doing short-term studies. So this isn't, I quite agree, we really have to broaden our thinking and look at many alternatives because we are coming to some extreme stresses. And part of it is we're adding 250 or 2.5 billion people that we want to feed, and we're not feeding the people that we have now anywhere close to healthy and sustainable diets. So, and also again, there's no one solution for every context around the world. The contexts are extremely different, and we need a good long menu of different options, I think, for different regions to find what works best for them.
Gunnar, I mean, you're wanting to comment, I can see. Can you also just refer to, there's a question from someone from Romania asking if what do you think would be most impactful in terms of challenging the current system? Also, okay, as well as you comment on.
Well, I hope I get time. Yes. Well, I don't disagree that there can be a need to do research in new ways of producing food, but I do have a problem with the narrative of, you know, starvation, etc. We've seen that before. It was the same in 1960s, and the end result of that debate in 1960s we have now is the Green Revolution. It's the giant monocultures that Walter speaks about. They are a direct result of the narrative going on in the 1960s, which led to more irrigation, more chemical fertilizers, etc. And we actually have an enormous oversupply of agriculture crops today, which in turn is driving the livestock industry, especially chicken and pork production, is actually driven by the monocultures that you see in the Midwest or in Mato Grosso or other areas in the world, where you have transformed whole landscape into producing just one or a few crops. That is really driving the livestock industry, the animal farming industry, the factory farms. But in essence, we have a huge oversupply of agriculture products, which is a problem for farmers, I would say, especially for small farmers, because the prices are depressed in a way where you can't survive on small scale farming. Even traditional farmers like herders are losing out because people buy cheap chicken instead of buying grazed cattle, so to say. So I think we should not, I am also concerned about climate change, but I'm quite convinced that we have enough capacity to produce good food for the people of the world today. And I'm quite sure we will have that also within 20 years and 30 years. I'm less sure about 100 years. We'll see about that. And the other question, what I think is the option to change is actually to relocalize food systems more and more and embed them in the local cultures, because that's also how you make resilient systems, which is very well highlighted today with all the impacts of the corona crisis, that we need much more resilient food systems. And the only way to get that is actually to re-embed food in the local ecosystems and in the local cultures. And adapt the local diet again to what you can produce locally, instead of buying food from all the world, eating the same sushi or wheat loaf all over the world. So that's my input to what we need to do. Thank you.
Just to respond, do you think, Gunnar, from a developing country perspective, we have all the technology, the way Gunnar says it, and to feed the countries as well? Hindu, please.
Yeah, actually, I agree with what George said. If the world's going very warm, we cannot get the food that we want. So it's very important to know that now, I mean, even yesterday in the TV, I was seeing that they're saying people in Africa will be more than 50 million by the end of the year who will be faced with the food insecurity. So always it is like the same discourse, but the numbers are changing and increasing every day. So rather than changing the discussion on, oh, Africa, you're going to face the food insecurity, why they cannot say like, oh, we need to tackle climate change and limit the greenhouse gases. So by the next 10 years, if we didn't take a right decisions on how we can be in 1.5 or maybe 2 degrees, so we can have any kind of agriculture, it's not going to be happen in developing countries. So that's the thing, is not having a technology with a big farms that they want to transform Africa and feed people of Africa. No, we need to stop climate change, restore our biodiversity. We do have our knowledge, and support the smallholder farmers, and then the food insecurity can be faced. Without climate change tackle, without the SDGs reached, I think the food security will be a big challenge, not only for Africa, but for all the rest of the world.
Julia, any quick comments for like 30 seconds from your side?
Yeah,
just on the discussion, please. Yeah,
very, very quick. I fully agree. We have climate crisis. It's not climate change, it's climate crisis. Climate change is already here. And I think farming is a way to tackle it. Farming, doing it properly, adapting to the local conditions, really storing carbon in the soil, really restoring ecosystems is a way to tackle climate change. So we should see also farming as part of the solution to not reach those 5 degrees. Grassing is also part of the solution. Cattle is also part of the solution, but it depends where we do it. So really adapt systems to the local situations. So I understand the apocalyptic view of short. I share it. I'm also afraid, and I also agree we need to explore and have plan B, C, and D, but we should act now. And act now means invest in small farmers, invest in organic agriculture, invest in regenerative agriculture, invest in biodiversity protection, invest now. I think protect our indigenous community, our small farmers, I think now.
Okay, I think that's a very good wrap-up statement from your end. Can we go through the panelists? Just 30 seconds, please. What is your last take-home message? And we can start with Julia. 30 seconds. What is your last take-home message from this discussion? One sentence would be nice.
Let's act now. It's now the moment.
Okay, Walter?
I would like to also emphasize what we eat as well as how we produce it, because we are on a track to really very destructive outcome in terms of our global environment. And part of the problem is the huge consumption of red meat in US, and increasing now up, but China's up equal to the US, and the rest of the world is going down that same track too. And we just multiplying the adverse consequences that we're seeing. So part of the important point is to shift more, or in many cases, just maintain diets that are healthy and sustainable, rather than pursuing the track that we're on in terms of what we eat, as well as how we produce it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Hindu, any last word here?
It is our choice all to respect the knowledge of indigenous peoples, the land the farmers recognize, and we do have all the tools. So let us act together and act now.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Gunnar, can you unmute?
Yes. Well, I like to promote the idea of a landscape model for food instead of a plate model or pyramid or whatever models you have. We should reconnect food and people with the landscape where they live. So a landscape model of food which builds on what is there around us should be a desirable outcome, I would say, on how you can link food and farming, which also have a lot of social perspectives. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Interesting. George, any last take? 30 seconds.
Well, thank you everyone for a really fascinating and important discussion. The key issue for me is we face the greatest predicament humankind has ever faced, which is the gathering collapse of our life support systems, including our farming support systems, which is the entire natural world. Obviously, we have to do everything we possibly can in our power to prevent that collapse from happening. We need to be throwing everything there is in it. We can see with the pandemic that governments are prepared to act, but let's act on climate breakdown. Let's stop that from happening. But at the same time, let's ensure ourselves against the possibility that it does happen, and I'm afraid that is a very strong possibility indeed, by keeping a very open mind about where our food might be coming from.
Thanks a lot, George. Thanks. Really, really useful point. I think we've got quite a good an interesting set of messages today. I think coming out that we need to go back to our traditional food systems to look at ecosystem-based food, the sort of landscape approach to this, I think is a really useful point. I think we've come up with the discussion that lab-grown food is part of the bigger set of options that we need to think about, but think about every technology in a very specific way, but look at how do we manage that for the good of mankind and in a sustainable way. But also the corporate discussion was quite important here, looking at how do we take this technology out of the hands of corporates to take it away from profit to more open source and for better use, by people. I think the call to action now, I think, is important. There was an important point about looking at instruments that we can use to address the current market asymmetries at the moment that are not favoring healthy and nutritious diets. I think Walter made that point with changing our incentive infrastructure in terms of loans, taxes, and subsidies that sort of help the market. But I think overall, act now, look at all the options, go back to the more, ecosystem-based and more healthy options. I hope that sort of captures the essence of our discussions. Otherwise, thank you very much. I don't know if Conrad wants to close up, but I think George, Gunnar, Hindu, Walter, Julia, thank you so much. It's been phenomenal, exceptional. We've had more than 1 million people connected, so that's really great, and the messaging has been going across. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Great sharing. Thank you for a great job.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you,
everyone. Conrad, do you want to take over?
Yes. Thank you so much,
Peter. See you in real
Peter.
person sometime.
Yeah.
Right. I also want to say thank you to everybody. I want to say thank you to Peter. Thanks for moderating. It was a fascinating discussion. Thanks to everybody in the panel. It was a great discussion, great debate. Some big topics coming out here. We're really talking about our collective future and how we're going to try and come up with solutions and come up with them very, very quickly. I'm sitting here in Bonn in what is promising or threatening to be the next serious drought in Germany in less than 3 years, 2 of them already in the last 3 years. Africa to Bonn, and I thought I was leaving dust bowls and drought behind when I left, when I came to Europe, and clearly it has followed me here. And I think this is really part of what we have to accept. So thanks for that. I would like to make a quick turn back to our interaction, go back to Slido and see what we have there. What are the last few thoughts that came through? What are the key takeaways from this forum? Thank you, things are happening. Yes, things are happening, and they have to happen very, very quickly. I don't know if there are other takeaways coming through from there. There was some building bridges between food communities, AIDS economies, and ecologies. Yep, good thoughts. We had a lot of questions that we just unfortunately could not get to. Really good questions, some challenging questions in that group, asking, how does the organic sector join this move? How do we become part of the activist move? How do we bring these issues of climate change and agriculture together? The issues that we have there that we have to deal with. And we will pick up on some of these questions. We will take them back into our fora, and we will try and answer and keep the debate going. And that's really where I would like to start closing us up. I would like to invite you to visit our blog. Organic Without Boundaries is our blog. You can reach it through our website. And on the blog, we tackle a number of these issues. We have you talk to us, bring it in. Food is complicated, says somebody, save the soil. Yep. I don't think food is that complicated. I think it's people who are complicated. We're making it more complicated than it's complex, yes, but it is great. So with that, I really want to start saying goodbye. We've had a long day together. I would like to thank everyone for making this possible. We had a team of people right around the world, working all the way from Indonesia to Bonn, to the Americas. Thank you for everybody, the panelists and moderators, especially for your contribution. Really, the whole from Mix International and GLF behind the scenes. And until we meet again, be well, be safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. Social distancing doesn't mean that we cannot be close in our hearts and in our minds. Be blessed, and goodbye.